When you live alone, any unfamiliar sound seems suspicious. I sat up straight in my chair, putting down the newspaper I was reading. Something creaked, either the old floorboards or my own spine. Something definitely creaked in the house. I froze, listening. Silence. Only the ticking of the old wall clock I inherited from my father. Probably just the house cooling down, I thought, settling back into my chair. At 73, you begin to understand that all these mysterious creaks are just signs of old age. The old age of the house, of course, not mine. My name is Orson Rivendell. I've been living alone in this two-story house on the outskirts of Providence for 3 years now. My Eleanor died of lung cancer. 40 years of smoking unfiltered cigarettes did their job. I warned her 1,000 times, but she just waved it off. You have to die of something, Orson. I picked up the newspaper again, but the letters blurred before my eyes. My eyesight had been getting worse in recent years, but I stubbornly refused to wear glasses. It was a small weakness I allowed myself, to deny my own aging. Saturday mornings were always a time of rituals for me. Breakfast at exactly 7:30, oatmeal with a spoonful of honey, toast with peanut butter, and a cup of black coffee. Then I would check the mailbox, although there was rarely anything there except advertising flyers and bills. Then I read the newspaper, which I still subscribe to, even though Tallulah says it's a waste of money. Dad, everything is on the internet. But I like the feel of paper under my fingers, the smell of printing ink. Tallulah is my only daughter. We used to be close, but after Eleanor's death, everything changed. Perhaps I was the first to pull away. Grief does strange things to people. Or maybe the cracks that had always been in our relationship simply became more noticeable. I got up from the chair feeling my knees ache. 30 years of sedentary work at the tax office had taken their toll. I walked to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. I needed something to fill the silence. My gaze fell on the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. I marked important dates on it with a red pen. Birthdays, anniversaries, doctor's appointments. Today was Saturday, June 16th. Nothing important. Maybe I should call Tallulah, just to see how she's doing. But our phone conversations lately have been strained, full of awkward pauses and perfunctory questions. Since she married that Peregrine Haywood 6 months ago, we've only seen each other twice. At the wedding itself, where I felt more like a spectator than the father of the bride, and at Christmas, when she stopped by for 40 minutes, refusing even a cup of tea. The kettle boiled and I made tea. Earl Grey was Eleanor's favorite. She always drank it after dinner, with a drop of milk and half a sugar cube. Exactly half, Orson. No more and no less, she would say, and I could never tell if she was joking or not. I looked at my reflection in the glass door of the microwave. My gray hair, which was still thick, was the only thing I could boast about. Deep wrinkles around my eyes and mouth. If Eleanor could see me now, she would say I looked like a grumpy old man from one of those comics they print in the Sunday papers. Returning to the living room with a cup of tea, I tried again to concentrate on the newspaper. Something about rising gas prices, another political scandal. The world outside my home continued to exist, although it hardly concerned me. The phone rang unexpectedly, making me jump. I rarely receive calls, especially at home. I only use my cell phone to call a taxi or order groceries. Rivendell speaking, I said, picking up the phone. Dad? Tallulah's voice sounded strange, not exactly alarmed, but rather tense. It's me. I found out, I replied, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. My instincts told me something was wrong. Did something happen? No, everything's fine, she replied quickly, too quickly. I'm calling to invite you to dinner. With Peregrine. On Wednesday, I hesitated before answering. The invitation was unexpected. She hadn't made any attempts to see me since Christmas. Wednesday? I asked, even though I had heard her clearly. I just needed to buy some time to think. Yes, at 7 o'clock. Nothing special, just a family dinner. Peregrine suggested it, saying you'd hardly seen our new house. I hadn't seen their house. They bought it shortly after their wedding, a small cottage in the suburbs of Providence. Tallulah said they took out a mortgage, even though I offered to help with the down payment. She refused. We can manage on our own, Dad. Peregrine thinks we need to be independent. Okay, I'll come, I finally said. Is there anything you need me to bring? No, nothing. Just come, okay? There was something in her voice that made me uneasy, But maybe I was just looking for problems where there weren't any. Of course, I replied. See you Wednesday. She hung up without even saying goodbye. Strange. She always used to say, I love you, Dad, at the end of every conversation, even when we argued. I went back to my tea, which had already gone cold. Peregrine Haywood. I had only seen him briefly at the wedding. A tall, thin man of about 45, with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing gray eyes. He was a psychology professor at the local college, at least according to Tallulah. There was something about him that I didn't like right away. Maybe it was the way he held Tallulah, not like a loving husband, but like a man showing off a valuable acquisition, or the way he addressed others, with a barely perceptible hint of condescension, as if he were talking to children. But my opinion didn't matter much. Tallulah was 39, a grown woman who made her own decisions, and she had chosen him. After her divorce from her first husband, Edward, 10 years ago, she seemed to have closed herself off. She became more cautious, less trusting of people. It had been a difficult period. Edward had left her for her best friend, leaving Tallulah with a mortgage and a broken heart. I had offered to let her move in with me and Eleanor, but she refused. I need to learn to cope on my own, Dad. And she did. She got a job as a dispatcher for a taxi service, paid off her loan, even started dating. But she never brought these men home, never introduced them to us, until Peregrine. I remember when she called Eleanor and me almost 2 years ago. I've met someone special. Her voice sounded different, younger, livelier. She wanted us to meet him over dinner. But a week later, Eleanor took a turn for the worse and was hospitalized. The introduction was postponed. And then Eleanor died, and everything changed. Tallulah was there for the first few months, helping with the funeral, visiting every weekend, calling every day. But then her visits became less frequent, her calls shorter. And a year ago, she announced that she was marrying Peregrine. The wedding was modest, only 20 guests, including me. Since then, Tallulah has changed. She has become quieter, more careful with her words. She stopped talking about her work and her plans for the future. During our last meeting at Christmas, she kept looking at her watch, as if she was afraid of being late. And she hardly talked about Peregrine, although before she couldn't stop talking about how wonderful he was. I put down my cup of half-finished tea. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe they really just wanted to mend fences, show off their new home. Maybe Tallulah just needed time to get used to her new role, the role of wife. But something in her voice during the call bothered me, something like fear. I walked over to my desk, took out my diary and wrote, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, dinner at Tallulah and Peregrine's. Then I added the address she had given me a few months ago. Suddenly, I felt very tired. I didn't want to go to this dinner. I didn't want to see how Tallulah had changed, how she had distanced herself from me. I didn't want to meet Peregrine and pretend that I was happy that he had become part of our family. But I'll go, because no matter what, she's my daughter. And if there's even the slightest chance of repairing our relationship, I have to try. I glanced at the photo on the mantelpiece. Tallulah on her graduation day, 18 years old with bright red hair she inherited from Eleanor and freckles all over her face. She was smiling at the camera, hugging Eleanor and me. We all looked so happy, so carefree. Where did it all go? When did we stop being a family? I closed my eyes, letting the memories flood in. Tallulah learning to ride a bike. Tallulah making breakfast for Eleanor and me for the first time. Burnt toast and scrambled eggs that we ate with such enthusiasm, as if it were a delicacy in a 5-star restaurant. Tallulah dancing with me at prom because her boyfriend didn't show up. My daughter, my only daughter. How many times in recent years have I wanted to call her just to hear her voice? How many times have I dialed the number and hung up after the first ring? How many times have I driven past the taxi service where she worked, hoping to bump into her? But pride always stopped me. Or fear. Fear of seeing disappointment in her eyes, hearing irritation in her voice. Fear of realizing that she no longer needed me. The phone rang again, making me jump. Had Tallulah changed her mind about dinner? Rivendell here, I said, picking up the phone. Orson? It's Jubilee, my neighbor's cheerful voice rang out. I baked a blueberry pie and thought you might like to come over for a cup of tea. Jubilee Winthrop lived across the street, a 70-year-old widow, a former meteorologist, now retired. We met shortly after Eleanor's death. She brought a pot of homemade soup and offered her help. Since then, we had occasionally met for tea, discussing books, politics, and the weather. Nothing special, just two lonely old people talking. "Thank you, Jubilee," I replied, "but I'm not in the mood for company today." "I understand," she said after a short pause. "But you know, Orson, sometimes company is exactly what we need, even when we think otherwise." Maybe she was right, but right now I wanted to be alone, to think about my upcoming visit to Tallulah. "Another time," I promised. "Thanks for the invitation." After talking to Jubilee, I decided to take a short walk. It was a warm, sunny day, a typical June day in Providence. I put on a light jacket and left the house. Our neighborhood had hardly changed in the 30 years that Eleanor and I had lived here. The same neat houses with well-kept lawns, the same old maple trees casting shadows on the sidewalks. I walked slowly, leaning on my cane, an old habit I couldn't shake, even though the doctor said my knees were better. Passing by the park, I saw a young woman with a little girl. The woman was holding the child's hand, patiently listening to her endless questions. They reminded me of Tallulah as a child, just as curious, just as energetic. "Why is the sky blue, Daddy? Where does the sun go at night, Daddy? Why don't I have a little brother, Daddy?" I never had a good answer to that last question. Eleanor and I wanted more children, but it didn't work out. The doctors never could explain why. I kept walking, lost in my memories, until I reached a small cafe on the corner. Eleanor and I used to come here often on weekends. She always ordered a blueberry muffin and a cappuccino, and I had a simple black coffee. Inside, almost nothing had changed. The same wooden tables, the same paintings on the walls. I sat down at a table by the window and ordered coffee. While I was waiting for my order, my gaze fell on a couple at the next table. A man and a woman, both in their 30s. They sat silently, buried in their phones. No conversation, no laughter, not even a glance at each other. And for some reason, I felt sad for them. Eleanor and I weren't a perfect couple. We had our problems, our arguments, but even after 40 years of marriage, we still talked to each other. We still found things to talk about. The waitress brought my coffee, and I took a sip. Too hot, too strong, not like Eleanor used to make it. My thoughts returned to the upcoming dinner. What would I say to Tallulah? What would I talk about with Peregrine? Maybe I should have bought a gift, even though Tallulah said not to bring anything. A bottle of wine, perhaps? But I didn't even know if Peregrine drank. Tallulah never talked about his habits, his preferences. I knew less about my son-in-law than I did about the mailman who delivered my newspaper. I finished my coffee and paid the bill. On the way back, I stopped at a flower shop and bought a small bouquet. Nothing fancy, just a few yellow chrysanthemums. Tallulah had always loved the color yellow. When I got home, I put the flowers in a vase and sat down in my chair again. Fatigue came over me with renewed force. At my age, even a short walk took a lot of energy. I closed my eyes, thinking about what Tallulah might want from me. Money? Hardly. She never asked for financial help, even when she was struggling after the divorce. Reconciliation? Perhaps. But then why now, after 6 months of silence? And something in her voice continued to bother me. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it made me nervous. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock. 4 in the afternoon. Wednesday was still a long way off. Plenty of time to worry, plenty of time to imagine the worst. Maybe everything would be fine. Maybe this dinner was just what we needed to start over. Maybe Peregrine was actually a good person, and I had been unfair to him. But then why the strange phone call? Why the tense voice? I sat up straight in my chair, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. What if Tallulah was in trouble? What if this dinner was her way of asking for help without saying so directly? No, I was just being paranoid. I had spent too much time alone, thinking too much about the past. Tallulah was a grown woman. She could take care of herself. And yet, something was wrong. I could feel it. The days leading up to Wednesday dragged on agonizingly slowly. I tried to distract myself with my usual activities, reading, walking, even cleaning the garage, which I had been putting off for months. But my thoughts kept returning to Tallulah's strange phone call and the upcoming dinner. Wednesday morning was clear and warm. I woke up earlier than usual, before 6. My old habits as a tax inspector hadn't gone anywhere. For 30 years I had gotten up at 5:30, And now, even in retirement, I rarely slept past 6. After drinking my coffee and eating breakfast, I decided I needed a haircut before visiting my daughter. The last time I had been to the barber was over a month ago, and my gray hair was already sticking out in all directions, making me look like a scatterbrained professor. Eleanor always said I looked like Einstein when I didn't get a haircut on time. Joe's barber shop was a 10-minute walk from my house. I had been going there for 20 years. Joe himself, a short Italian man with a thick mustache, had long since retired, handing the business over to his son, but the name remained the same. "Good morning, Mr. Rivedale." Tony, Joe's son, greeted me when I walked in. "The usual." "The usual," I confirmed, sitting down in the chair. While Tony worked with the scissors, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The wrinkles had deepened. The bags under my eyes were more noticeable. I had never been vain, but age still made me feel a little sad. Not so much because of my appearance, but because of the realization that I didn't have much time left. "Going somewhere special?" Tony asked, noticing that I was studying my reflection intently. "To my daughter's for dinner," I replied. "Oh, that's nice. Family gatherings are always important," he said with a smile. I said nothing. I didn't want to explain that Tallulah and my family gatherings had been rare and tense lately. After returning home from the barber, I spent the rest of the morning trying to find a suitable shirt for dinner. Most of my clothes were old and worn out. I didn't see the point in spending money on a new wardrobe at my age, but now I wanted to look decent. Not for Peregrine, of course, for Tallulah. In the end, I settled on a blue shirt that Eleanor had given me for my 70th birthday. She always said that blue brought out my eyes. "Your eyes are like the summer sky, Orson," she would say, although in reality, my eyes were just gray, like most people's. After lunch, I lay down to rest, another old habit I had acquired in recent years. I woke up to the sound of the phone. Glancing at the clock, I realized I had slept for more than 2 hours. It was almost 4 o'clock. I walked over to the phone, expecting to hear Tallulah. Maybe she wanted to reschedule dinner or clarify some details. But the name Roland Pitcairn appeared on the phone screen. My lawyer and longtime friend rarely called just to chat. Usually, his calls meant some legal issues or tax problems. "Roland," I answered, feeling a slight uneasiness. But instead of my lawyer's voice, I heard a short message tone. I took the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. There was a text message, just a few words typed in capital letters. "Call before it's too late." My heart skipped a beat. Roland never sent me messages, especially ones this dramatic. Something was clearly wrong. I immediately dialed his number. The rings seemed endless, and with each passing second, my anxiety grew. "Orson," Roland's voice sounded tense when he finally answered. "It's good that you called back right away." "What's wrong?" I asked, feeling my mouth go dry. "Your message." "Sorry for the drama, but this is important," he interrupted me. "Where are you now?" "At home," I replied, growing more anxious. "Getting ready for dinner at Tallulah's." "Roland, what's the matter? Are you going to see her tonight?" His voice sounded alarmed. "That's why I'm writing. I just found out something about your brother-in-law, Peregrine, and I think you need to know this before you go to their place." I sank into a chair, feeling my knees suddenly go weak. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's a long story, and I'd prefer to tell it in person," Roland said. "But if you're going to see them today, there's no time. So I'll say it straight. Peregrine Haywood is not who he claims to be." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "His real name is Fletcher Buckminster," Roland said, "and he served 3 years in a Massachusetts prison for domestic violence. He beat his ex-wife so badly that she was hospitalized with multiple fractures and a concussion." I felt the room start to spin around me. It couldn't be true. Tallulah couldn't have married someone like that. She would have known. She would have felt. "Are you sure, Nan?" I asked, still not believing it. "Maybe it's some kind of mistake? A namesake or—" "No mistake, Orson." Roland's voice was firm. "I did a thorough check. Photos, fingerprints, everything matches. Peregrine Haywood and Fletcher Buckminster are the same person." I closed my eyes, trying to process what I had heard. How was this possible? How could Tallulah not know? "But how did you even start checking him out?" I asked. "Why now?" Roland sighed. "It was a coincidence, really. I was at a charity dinner last Friday, and there was a woman there, Carol Whitmore. We got talking, And when I mentioned that I lived in Providence, she asked if I knew a psychology professor named Peregrine Haywood. I said yes, he's married to my friend's daughter. Then she turned pale and asked to speak to me in private. I gripped the phone tightly, waiting for the rest of the story. It turns out she knew him as Fletcher Buckminster. He was married to her sister, Diane, whom he beat up 5 years ago. After his release from prison, he disappeared, and they heard nothing from him. Until Carol accidentally saw his photo on the social media page of the college where he now teaches, under the name Peregrine Haywood. I felt anger begin to boil inside me. This man, this monster, had been close to my daughter. He had slept in the same bed with her and may have already begun to reveal his true nature. There's something else, Roland continued after a pause. After talking to Carol, I started my own investigation, and I discovered that Peregrine has at least 2 other families in different states. In Vermont, he is known as Edmund Prescott, married to a woman named Lorraine for 4 years. And in New Hampshire, he's Terrence Aldridge, engaged to a local school teacher. He's living a triple life, Orson. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could a man play such a complicated game? And more importantly, why? But why? I asked, voicing my thoughts. What does he want from these women? Money? Perhaps, Roland replied, but it's not just about money. Carol says her sister was completely psychologically broken before the physical abuse began. He isolated her from her family and friends and made her doubt her own perception of reality. It's called gaslighting. She became completely dependent on him, emotionally, financially, in every way. And only when he beat her so badly that the neighbors called the police did the truth come out. I remembered how Tallulah had changed over the past year, how she had become quieter, more withdrawn, how she had stopped communicating with her old friends, with me. Could this be the beginning of the same process? Roland, my voice trembled, I need to warn Tallulah. Immediately. That's why I called, Roland said. But Orson, be careful. People like Fletcher are very skilled manipulators. He has probably already convinced Tallulah that you are against him, that you want to destroy their happiness. If you just show up and accuse him, she may not believe you. I knew Roland was right. My relationship with Tallulah had been strained in recent years. If I just showed up and started accusing her husband of such terrible things, she would think I was trying to sabotage her marriage. What do you suggest? I asked. Go to dinner as planned, Roland said. Observe. Look for clues. You might notice something that confirms what I'm saying. And after dinner, if you get a chance to talk to Tallulah alone, try to gently find out if everything is okay with her. Don't accuse Peregrine directly. Just let her know that you're there for her, that she can turn to you if something is wrong. I sighed. The plan was reasonable, but I wanted to act immediately, to grab Tallulah and take her away from this monster. In the meantime, I'll continue gathering information, Roland continued. I have a friend in the police force who will help us get access to Buckminster's full file. Once we have irrefutable evidence, we can take more decisive action. Thank you, Roland, I said. I don't know how to thank you for this. Don't thank me, he replied. We've been friends for 30 years. I can't just stand by when your daughter's in danger. After talking to Roland, I sat motionless for a long time, trying to make sense of everything I had learned. The clock showed almost 5. Dinner was 2 hours away, but it felt like every minute counted. My first instinct was to call Tallulah and warn her. But what if Peregrine, or Fletcher, as he was really called, was nearby? What if he was checking her phone, monitoring her conversations? I could only make the situation worse. I got up and started pacing around the room trying to collect my thoughts. I had to look normal at this dinner, not arouse suspicion. But how could I sit at the same table with a man who had beaten his ex-wife? How could I smile and make small talk, knowing that my daughter might be in danger? The phone rang again, making me jump. This time it was Jubilee. Orson? Her voice sounded concerned. I saw you come back from the barber, but then you didn't come out all day. Is everything okay? I wanted to say yes. Everything was fine. I was just getting ready for dinner at my daughter's. But instead, I heard my own voice say, No, Jubilee, everything is not okay. And before I could stop myself, I told her everything I had learned from Roland, about Peregrine's real name, his prison sentence, the other families. With every word, the story seemed more and more unreal, like the plot of a cheap detective novel. But it was true, a terrible, frightening truth. Jubilee listened silently without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, and then she said, "Orson, you need to go to this dinner. You need to see for yourself what's going on, but you shouldn't go alone." "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised by her reaction. "I'll go with you," she said firmly. "Just not into the house, of course. I can wait in the car, not far from their house. If anything goes wrong, you call me, and I'll call the police." I was touched by her offer, but I shook my head even though she couldn't see it through the phone. "No, Jubilee, it's too dangerous." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," she replied. "I'm offering. And I won't take no for an answer." Orson Rivendell. "I'll be at your house at 6:30. We'll take my car." Before I could object, she hung up. I shook my head but felt a little lighter. The thought of Jubilee being nearby gave me a sense of security. I went back to the bedroom and started getting dressed. A blue shirt, dark pants, a jacket that I usually only wore on special occasions. Looking in the mirror, I tried to keep my face neutral, but my eyes betrayed my anxiety. What if Tallulah was already in danger? What if Peregrine had already raised his hand to her? These thoughts were driving me crazy. I took an old photograph out of the desk drawer. Tallulah on her wedding day with Peregrine. She was smiling at the camera, but now, looking at the photo, I could see the tension in her smile, the anxiety in her eyes. Or was it just my imagination, now that I knew the truth? Next to her stood Peregrine, tall and thin, with a neat beard and piercing gray eyes. I stared at his face, trying to see traces of cruelty, signs that this man was capable of beating a woman half to death. But there was nothing like that to be seen. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, perhaps a little more intelligent than most, thanks to his thin-rimmed glasses and the posture of a university professor. How could such a man lead a triple life? How could he be a psychology professor in Providence, a husband to a woman in Vermont, and a fiancé to a teacher in New Hampshire all at the same time? Logistically, it seemed almost impossible. But Roland wouldn't lie to me, and he had no reason to make up such a complicated story. If he said he had checked the facts, then that was the case. I put the photo back in the drawer and looked at my watch. 6:15. Jubilee would be here soon. I went down to the living room and picked up the bouquet of chrysanthemums I had bought for Tallulah. The flowers had started to wilt a little, but they still looked decent. The yellow color reminded me of sunny days when Tallulah was little, and Eleanor and I would take her on picnics to the park. She always picked yellow flowers, dandelions, buttercups, anything she could find, and wove them into wreaths for Eleanor. Those days now seemed infinitely distant, as if they were another life, another family. In a sense, they were. The doorbell snapped me out of my reverie. Jubilee stood on the doorstep, dressed in a simple gray dress. Her gray hair was neatly styled, and her face wore a determination I rarely saw. "Ready?" she asked without preamble. I nodded, feeling a strange gratitude for her presence. We left the house and got into her old Ford. The car was clean and well-maintained, like everything that belonged to Jubilee. "Address?" she asked, starting the engine. I gave her the address Tallulah had given me a few months ago. It was in the suburbs of Providence, a quiet neighborhood with small cottages and well-kept lawns. As we drove, I thought about what I would say to Tallulah. How could I bring up the fact that her husband might not be who he claimed to be? How could I ask if she was okay without arousing Peregrine's suspicions? "What are you thinking about?" Jubilee asked, glancing at me quickly. "What I'm going to say to my daughter," I replied. "How to warn her without scaring her." Jubilee nodded. "Be careful, Orson. If what your lawyer said is true, this man is dangerous, and he has probably already turned Tallulah against you." I knew she was right. In recent months, Tallulah had been colder, more distant. She avoided meetings and rarely called. Perhaps Peregrine had already begun his work, cutting her off from her family and friends. "I'll be careful," I promised. "Just stay in touch, okay?" "I'm not going anywhere," Jubilee assured me. "I'll wait in the car, 2 blocks from their house. Call me if anything goes wrong." We pulled up to the quiet street where Tallulah and Peregrine's house was located. Jubilee stopped the car 2 blocks away, as promised. "Good luck," she said as I got out of the car. "And be careful." I nodded and walked toward my daughter's house, clutching a bouquet of chrysanthemums in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. "Call before it's too late!" Roland's message rang in my head like a warning bell. I hoped it wasn't too late to save my daughter from a man who, as it turned out, was not who he claimed to be. Tallulah and Peregrine's house was exactly as I had imagined it. A typical suburban cottage with a neatly trimmed lawn and a freshly painted white fence. A silver sedan was parked in the driveway, presumably Peregrine's car. Parked nearby was a small red hatchback, which I recognized as Tallulah's car. I paused for a moment in front of the gate, gathering my thoughts. After talking to Roland, everything seemed surreal. I was going to dinner with my daughter and her husband, who, as I had just learned, was a dangerous criminal hiding under a false name. It sounded like the plot of a crime series, not real life. Taking a deep breath, I opened the gate and walked up the path to the front door. The bouquet of chrysanthemums in my hand seemed out of place, almost ridiculous in the current situation. But I couldn't come empty-handed. The door opened before I even had a chance to ring the bell. Peregrine stood on the threshold, smiling that smile that always seemed too rehearsed to me. "Orson," he exclaimed, as if he was genuinely happy to see me. "Welcome." Tallulah was so worried you wouldn't come, I forced myself to smile back, even though everything inside me was clenched with disgust. This man, this monster, was talking to me as if we were old friends. "I always keep my word," I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Especially to my daughter." Pergine stepped aside, letting me into the house. Inside, everything was immaculately clean and tidy. Not a speck of dust, not a single thing out of place. It looked less like a home and more like the perfect set for a furniture commercial. "Tallulah is in the kitchen, finishing dinner," Peregrine said, closing the door behind me. "Let me take your coat." I took off my light coat and handed it to him, watching his every move closely. Nothing in his behavior suggested he was a rapist or a sociopath. He was polite, friendly, and completely normal at first glance. That made the situation even more frightening. "Flowers for Tallulah?" he asked, nodding at the bouquet in my hand. "That's very sweet of you." "She loves yellow." "I know," I replied dryly. "She's my daughter." Something flashed in his eyes. Irritation? Discontent? But it disappeared so quickly that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. The smile remained. "Of course," he said softly. "Let's go to the kitchen. She'll be glad to see you." I followed him through the living room, noting the details of the interior. The bookshelves were filled with books on psychology and philosophy, probably Peregrine's professional library. Several abstract paintings in expensive frames hung on the walls. Not a single photograph. Not a single personal item that would tell me anything about the people who lived here. Tallulah was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She looked thinner than I remembered and paler. Her red hair, usually bright and shiny, seemed dull, pulled back into a careless bun. She was wearing a simple blue dress with long sleeves, despite the warm weather. "Tallulah," I called, and she turned around. For a moment, her face lit up with a smile. A real smile, not the forced one I had seen lately. But then she seemed to remember something, and the smile became more restrained. "Dad," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, approaching her and holding out the bouquet. "I brought you chrysanthemums. Remember how much you loved them when you were a child?" She took the flowers, and for a moment our hands touched. Her fingers were cold despite the heat from the stove. "Thank you, they're beautiful," she said quietly, without looking me in the eye. "I'll put them in a vase." She turned away, opening a cupboard in search of a vase. I noticed her glance quickly at Peregrine, as if seeking approval. It was a fleeting movement, but it told me a lot. "How can I help?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Everything's ready," Tallulah replied, pouring water into the vase. "Perry, dear, could you get the wine?" "The Italian one we've been saving for a special occasion." "Of course, dear," he replied, but didn't move. "Maybe we should take Orson to the dining room first. Let him sit down while you finish up." Again, that quick exchange of glances between them. I saw Tallulah tense slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, you're right," she said. "Dad, the dining room is through that door. I'll be there in a minute." I wanted to stay with her, to help, just to be there. But Peregrine had already put his hand on my shoulder, gently guiding me toward the door. "Tallulah is an excellent cook," he said as we entered the dining room. "She has learned a lot over the past few months." I have always said that good food is the foundation of a cozy home. The table was set with impeccable precision: white tablecloth, silver cutlery, crystal glasses. like a photo from an interior design magazine. Too perfect for an ordinary family dinner. Please sit down, Peregrine said, pointing to a chair. I'll bring the wine. He left the room and I took the opportunity to look around more closely. The dining room, like the rest of the house, was impersonally perfect. No personal items, no photographs, just expensive furniture and a few abstract paintings on the walls. A few minutes later, Tallulah entered with a large platter of roast meat. She placed it on the table and returned to the kitchen without saying a word. Soon Peregrine returned with a bottle of red wine and Tallulah with two more dishes, vegetables and potato gratin. Everything looks delicious, I said, when Tallulah sat down opposite me and Peregrine took his place at the head of the table. Tallulah tried hard, Peregrine said, opening the wine. She's been cooking all morning. I told her it wasn't necessary, that a simple dinner would be just as good, but she insisted. I looked at my daughter, but she just smiled faintly, not looking up. Something about this dynamic felt deeply wrong. It was as if Peregrine was speaking for her, and she was simply agreeing. I've always loved your cooking, I said, addressing Tallulah directly. Remember when you made those blueberry pancakes for my 60th birthday? Eleanor kept trying to get the recipe out of you. For a moment, Tallulah's eyes lit up, and she looked up. Yes, I remember. Mom always said I put too much sugar in them, but you liked them. I always liked everything you cooked, I replied, feeling my throat tighten with memories of happier times. Tallulah told me a lot about her childhood, Peregrine interjected, pouring wine into the glasses. About how you and Eleanor supported her, how she always felt your love. There was nothing obviously wrong with his words, but the tone in which he said them made me wary. It was as if he were reading from a script rather than truly knowing about our relationship. We tried to be good parents, I said cautiously. Although, of course, everyone makes mistakes. Oh yes, mistakes, Peregrine replied, cutting a piece of roast and placing it on Tallulah's plate. Tallulah told me how you disapproved of her first marriage. How you insisted that Edward wasn't right for her. And you were right, of course. But it created tension between you, didn't it? I felt my fingers tighten around my fork. What game was he playing? Why bring up old grievances if not to drive us further apart? Tallulah and I got through it, I said, looking at my daughter. Family is always family, no matter what. Of course, family is important, Peregrine agreed, now serving himself. That's why I'm so glad we're finally together. You know, Orson, I've always wanted to get to know you better. Tallulah has told me so much about you. He spoke smoothly, without hesitation, like an actor who had memorized his lines. I noticed that Tallulah had barely touched her food, just moving it around on her plate. Aren't you hungry? I asked her directly. She looked up, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. I'm just a little nervous, she replied quietly. I wanted everything to be perfect. Everything is perfect, dear, Peregrine said, placing his hand on her wrist. I noticed her flinch at his touch, though she tried to hide her reaction. Your father surely appreciates your efforts. Of course I do, I confirmed, but I'm more concerned about how you are. We haven't seen each other in so long. How's work? Still with the taxi service? Tallulah recently cut back her hours, Peregrine replied before she could open her mouth. We decided she shouldn't work so much. Stress is bad for your health, isn't it? I thought Tallulah liked her job, I said, deliberately addressing my daughter rather than him. I did, she replied quietly, but Peregrine is right. It was too exhausting. And now I have more time for home. For home, I repeated, looking around the immaculately clean dining room. Yes, I can see how well you take care of it. Tallulah has become a real homemaker, Peregrine said proudly. You should see how she's transformed this house. When we first bought it, it was such a mess. He continued talking about the house, the renovations, his plans for the future. Tallulah sat silently, occasionally nodding or adding a short yes to his monologue. I watched her, noticing how she constantly checked Peregrine's reaction, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. How's your work, Peregrine? I asked when he finally paused. Still teaching psychology? Oh, yes, he smiled, sipping his wine. I teach a course in social psychology and counsel students. It's very satisfying work, seeing young minds develop, understanding their problems, helping them. Social psychology, the perfect specialization for a manipulator. Knowing how the human mind works, how to influence people, how to make them doubt their own perceptions. And how long have you been in this field? I asked, trying to catch him out on any inconsistencies. Almost 15 years, he replied without hesitation. I started out as a clinical psychologist, but then I realized that teaching was more to my liking. He lied so smoothly that if I didn't know the truth, I would never have suspected deception. Where did you work before Providence? I continued, hoping that Tallulah would also pay attention to his answers. Mostly in Massachusetts, he said, and I felt a tightening inside. Even in his lies, he stayed close to the truth. Massachusetts, where he had been in prison. A small college in the suburbs of Boston. Nothing remarkable. Dad, why are you asking? Tallulah suddenly interjected. Her voice sounded tense. This sounds like an interrogation. Just curious, I replied, trying to sound casual. I want to get to know your husband better. I don't mind, Peregrine said, smiling. Your father has a right to know who you've tied your life to. If I were him, I'd want to make sure my daughter was in good hands too. He put his hand back on Tallulah's wrist, and I noticed his fingers tighten slightly. Not enough to cause pain, but enough to remind her of his presence, of his power. Exactly, I said, struggling to keep my tone calm. I want to be sure my daughter's happy. Oh, she's definitely happy. Peregrine turned to Tallulah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Isn't that right, dear? Yes, she replied, and I heard the insincerity in her voice. Of course. Dinner continued in the same vein. Pergine dominated the conversation, constantly interrupting Tallulah or answering for her. Every time I tried to bring up the past, our family, the time before he came along, he deftly changed the subject. I noticed other warning signs. The way Tallulah constantly watched Pergine's reactions. How she apologized for the smallest things, for the salt being too far away, for the wine not being cold enough, for the dessert being too simple. Each time Peregrine generously forgave her, saying that everything was fine, but his condescending tone suggested otherwise. When it was time for dessert, apple pie that Tallulah had baked herself, I decided to try talking to her alone. Tallulah, would you show me around the house? I asked as she began clearing the plates. I haven't seen how you've settled in here yet. She glanced uncertainly at Peregrine. Maybe after dessert, she suggested. The pie is better warm. Let your father see the house, Peregrine said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'll bring some coffee. You like it black. No sugar, right, Orson? That's right, I replied, surprised that he knew such a detail. Tallulah reluctantly put down the plates and led me out of the dining room. We walked through the living room, which I had already seen. Then she showed me Peregrine's study, a austere room with a massive desk and bookshelves reaching to the ceiling. This is where Peregrine works on his articles, she said. He's very productive. He's already published 3 papers this year. Impressive, I said, unable to hide my sarcasm. And where is your workplace? Where do you spend your time? She hesitated. I'm usually in the kitchen or the living room. I feel comfortable there. We climbed the stairs to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms, the master, a guest room, and a small room that Tallulah called the reading room. You always dreamed of a room like this, remember? I said, looking at the small, cozy space with an armchair by the window and shelves lined with books. In our old house, you made yourself a reading corner in the storage room, remember? Eleanor always laughed when she found you there with a flashlight and a book. Tallulah smiled. And for a moment I saw the girl I remembered. Yes, I remember. Mom always said I read like I breathed. This was the moment I had been waiting for. We were alone, far away from Peregrine. Tallulah, I said quietly, taking her hand. Are you happy? Truly happy? She pulled her hand away as if she had been burned. Of course, Dad. Why do you ask? Because you've changed, I said, looking her straight in the eye. You're not the same as you used to be. You're quieter, more cautious. And every time I see you with Peregrine, it's as if you're waiting for his approval before you say or do anything. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice was trembling. I've just grown up, Dad. I have my own life, my own home, my husband. A husband who may not be who he claims to be, I said, lowering my voice to a whisper, even though we were far from the kitchen. She frowned and her face suddenly hardened. What are you talking about? Tallulah, I got some information about Peregrine, I said, deciding to take a chance. His real name is Fletcher Buckminster. He served time in prison for beating his ex-wife, and he has other families in other states. I expected shock, disbelief, maybe even anger. But I didn't expect what happened. Tallulah laughed, a bitter, unnatural laugh. Oh my God, Dad, she said, shaking her head. Pergine warned me that you might do something like this, but I didn't believe him. I thought you were above that. What? I was stunned by her reaction. What are you talking about? Pergine told me that you would probably try to discredit him, she said, and I heard his voice in hers, not hers. He said you never approved of my choices, never trusted my judgment, and that you might do something to destroy our marriage, just like you tried to destroy my marriage to Edward. I was stunned. He had foreseen this. He had prepared her. Tallulah, listen to me, I said, trying to remain calm. This isn't a fabrication. My lawyer Roland has investigated. He has evidence. Photographs, fingerprints. Peregrine is not who he claims to be. Roland, she snorted. Your loyal dog who will do anything you say. Convenient, isn't it? To come up with a story that my husband is some kind of serial rapist with a fake name. It even sounds absurd. I didn't make this up, I said, feeling anger and despair fighting inside me. I would never lie about something like that. I'm worried about you, Tallulah. I can see how you've changed, how afraid you are of him. I'm not afraid of my husband. Her voice grew louder, and I could hear real anger in it. I love him. He cares for me, supports me, believes in me. Unlike you, who always thought I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. That's not true, I said, feeling every word she said hurt me. I've always believed in you, Tallulah. I've always been proud of you. Really? Her eyes narrowed. Then why do you come to my house and try to ruin my happiness? Why can't you just be happy for me? Why do you always have to control my life? I'm not trying to control you, I said, feeling the situation spiraling out of control. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection, she exclaimed. I'm 39 years old, Dad. I'm a grown woman. I can decide for myself who I want to be with. At that moment, we heard footsteps on the stairs, and a moment later, Peregrine appeared in the doorway. His face was concerned, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Is everything all right? He asked, looking at Tallulah. I heard raised voices. Not really, she replied, her voice trembling with anger. My father just accused you of being some kind of criminal with a fake name, that you have other families in other states, and that you beat your ex-wife. I expected to see anger, panic, or at least surprise on Peregrine's face, but he just smiled sadly and shook his head. I warned you this might happen, he said softly, walking over to Tallulah and putting his arms around her shoulders. Remember, I told you that your father might not approve of our marriage, that he might try to separate us. He turned to me, his eyes full of false sympathy. Orson, I understand your concern. You love your daughter and want the best for her. But making up stories like this, it's not going to help your relationship. I'm not making anything up, I said, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. And I think you know that very well, Fletcher. Something flashed in his eyes at the sound of that name. A quick, almost imperceptible reaction. But I caught it, and it convinced me that Roland was right. Dad, stop it, Tallulah exclaimed, pulling away from Peregrine's embrace. I'm not going to listen to this. If you can't respect my husband and my choice, you'd better leave. Tallulah, please. I took a step toward her, but she backed away. Just think about it. Check the facts yourself. Don't take my word for it, but don't take his either. Just check. Check what? Her voice was full of bitterness. Meaningless accusations based on your paranoia? Peregrine is my husband. I love him, and he loves me, and I won't let you destroy that. Peregrine put his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support, but his eyes, fixed on me, were cold and triumphant. He had won this round, and he knew it. Perhaps Orson should leave, he said softly. We're all too emotional to continue this conversation rationally. Yes, Tallulah agreed, without looking at me. I think you'd better leave, Dad. I stood there, stunned by the turn of events. I had come here to save my daughter, but instead it seemed I had only pushed her further away. Tallulah, I said quietly, I love you. Whatever happens, remember that. And if you ever need help, I'll always be there for you. Always? She didn't answer, just turned away, crossing her arms over her chest. Peregrine walked me down the stairs and to the door. When we reached the threshold, he smiled at me. Not a fake, friendly smile like before, but a cold, almost predatory one. Don't bother, Orson, he said quietly, so Tallulah couldn't hear. She won't believe you, no matter what you say. She's mine now, and before I could respond, he closed the door in my face. I stood on the porch, feeling rage boiling up inside me. This man, this monster, had manipulated my daughter, isolated her, controlled her. And now when I tried to intervene, he used my own words against me. But I wasn't going to give up. If Tallulah wouldn't listen, I would find another way to protect her. I wouldn't let this man ruin my daughter's life the way he had ruined the lives of other women. With that thought, I turned and walked down the path to the gate, leaving behind the house where my daughter lived with a man who was not who he claimed to be. I drove back in complete turmoil. Jubilee drove in silence, glancing at me with concern but asking no questions. She understood that I needed time to collect my thoughts. He already has complete control over her, I finally said when we were almost home. She wouldn't even listen to me. He prepared her, told her I would try to discredit him. Jubilee sighed heavily. People like that are always one step ahead. They think through every possibility, every threat to their control. What do I do now? I asked, feeling completely helpless. She's a grown woman. I can't just take her away from there. No, you can't, Jubilee agreed, but you can continue to gather information. Evidence she won't be able to ignore. I hardly slept that night. Tallulah's face was before my eyes. Alien, hostile, nothing like the daughter I knew, and Peregrine's cold, triumphant smile as he closed the door on me. She's mine now. Those words echoed in my head. In the morning, I called Roland and arranged to meet him at his office. He agreed to put everything else on hold, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Roland's office was in downtown Providence, in an old brick building with high ceilings and creaky wooden floors. The secretary, who had known me for many years, immediately showed me into his office. Roland rose from his desk when I entered. At 68, he looked younger than me, tall, straight, with thick gray hair neatly combed back. Only the deep wrinkles around his eyes betrayed his age. Orson, he shook my hand. How was dinner? I told him everything, about Peregrine's strange, controlling behavior, about how Tallulah constantly sought his approval, about my failed attempt to warn her, and about how Peregrine used my words against me. Roland listened attentively, taking notes in his notebook. He's smart, he said when I finished. He anticipated your reaction and prepared for it. But we're not going to sit idly by either. He opened a folder lying on the table. After our conversation, I contacted the Boston Police Department. I have a friend there, Detective McIntyre. He sent me a copy of Fletcher Buckminster's file. Roland handed me several photographs. The first one was of a man who was undoubtedly Peregrine, only younger and without a beard. The photo was apparently taken at the time of his arrest. Peregrine was holding a number tag in front of his chest, his face expressionless. It's definitely him, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. Yes, no doubt about it, Roland agreed. And here's the evidence of his crime. I found it difficult to look at the next photos. They showed a woman in her 30s with terrible bruises all over her face, her left eye swollen beyond recognition, her lips split open. This is Diana Whitmore, his ex-wife, Roland said quietly. He beat her systematically for 2 years, but this last incident was so serious that the neighbors called the police. Doctors diagnosed a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and multiple hematomas. I put the photos down, feeling nauseous. The thought that a man capable of such things was living with my daughter was unbearable. What else is in the file? I asked. Police reports, witness statements, medical reports. Roland leafed through the papers. Buckminster got 3 years but only served 2.5 for good behavior. After his release, he disappeared, and apparently he began to build his new identity, Perry Haywood. What about the other families? I asked. You said he was living a double life. Triple, to be precise, Roland corrected. I hired a private investigator to check this information. He confirmed that the man known in Vermont as Edmund Prescott and the man known in New Hampshire as Terrence Aldridge are the same Fletcher Buckminster. One person, 3 different lives. How is that even possible, I wondered. How does he manage it? And why? Control? Power? Possibly financial gain? Roland shrugged. Psychologists call people like that sociopaths. They have no empathy, no moral constraints. For them, manipulating others is a game, a way to assert their superiority. I remembered Peregrine's cold eyes, his smug smile. Yes, he definitely enjoyed his power over Tallulah. What do we do next? I asked. We have all this evidence, but Tallulah won't listen to it. I think we need to talk to Diana Whitmore in person, Roland said. Her testimony may be more convincing than the documents. Besides, she can tell us about the methods Buckminster used to control her. That will help us understand what's happening to Tallulah. Do you think she'll agree to meet with us? I asked doubtfully. After everything she's been through. Her sister Carol said that Diana works in a support group for victims of domestic violence, Roland said. She helps other women get out of similar situations. I think she'll want to help Tallulah too. Roland was right. When he called Carol, she promised to talk to her sister, and an hour later she called back with Diana's agreement to meet. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Boston the next day. I was nervous the whole way to Boston. What would I say to this woman? How would I explain that my daughter was repeating her fate? And most importantly, what would I learn from her that would help me save Tallulah? The cafe turned out to be a quiet place with subdued lighting and separate booths that provided privacy. Diana and Carol were already waiting for us. I recognized Diana immediately from the photos in the case file, even though 5 years had passed and there were no traces of the beatings left. She was a thin woman with short brown hair and a tense, alert gaze. "Mr. Rivendell," she said, extending her hand to me, "Carol told me about your situation. I'm very sorry that your daughter fell into Fletcher's trap." We sat down at a table, ordered coffee, and Diana began her story. She spoke quietly but confidently, like someone who had long since come to terms with her experience. "When I met Fletcher, he was the most charming man I had ever known," she began. "Attentive, caring, he seemed to understand me better than I understood myself. Our romance developed rapidly, and 3 months later we were married." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "The changes began almost immediately after the wedding. Small things at first. He criticized my clothes, said that some of my friends were a bad influence on me, suggested that I quit my job because too much stress is not good for you. All of this was presented as him caring about me. Her words made me shiver. That was exactly how Peregrine had talked about Tallulah's job during dinner. Gradually, I began to distance myself from my friends and family," Diana continued. "Every time I wanted to see someone, Fletcher found a reason why it was a bad idea. He checked my phone, my email, always knew where I was and who I was with. And he always said he was doing it out of love and concern." "When did the beatings start?" Roland asked cautiously. "About a year after the wedding," Diana replied. "The first time he hit me was when I stayed late at work for an hour. Then he cried, apologized, said it was because he loved me so much and was afraid something had happened to me. And I believed him." She smiled bitterly. "The classic pattern. After the violence comes remorse, gifts, promises that it will never happen again, and then it starts all over again, and each time it gets worse. He convinced me that I was to blame for his outbursts of anger, that if I were a better wife, he wouldn't get angry." "How did you get out?" I asked. "Thanks to my neighbors," Diana replied. "That night, he beat me so badly that I lost consciousness. I thought I was going to die. The neighbors heard the noise and called the police. Fletcher was arrested, and I was taken to the hospital. And there, lying with tubes in my nose and monitors all around me, I finally realized that the next time could be the last." We all sat in silence for a while, digesting her words. Then I asked the question that concerned me most. "How can I help my daughter? She doesn't believe that Peregrine is Fletcher. She thinks I'm trying to destroy her marriage." Diana looked at me with sympathy. "That's the hardest part. Fletcher has probably convinced her that everyone is against their relationship, that only he truly understands and loves her. In this state, the victim pushes away those who try to help, seeing them as a threat to their relationship. But what can I do?" I felt desperate. "Don't pressure her," Diana said firmly. "The more you insist, the more she will resist. Instead, try to maintain contact, no matter how weak it may be. Be there when she is ready to accept help." "How will I know when she's ready?" I asked. "Often it takes some kind of event to shatter the illusion," Diana said. "A moment when the mask slips so obviously that it can no longer be ignored. For me, it was that last beating when I thought I was going to die. I shuddered at the thought that Tallulah might need to go through something similar to see the light." "There's something else you need to know about Fletcher," Diana continued. "He's very methodical. First, he isolates his victim, cuts them off from family, friends, work. Then he starts gaslighting, making them doubt their own perception of reality." "I never said that. You're making it all up. You're too emotional." Then the control becomes total. What to wear, who to talk to, when to leave the house. And only then does the physical abuse begin. What stage do you think my daughter's at? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. Judging by your story, the isolation is almost complete, Diana said. She has distanced herself from you and reduced her working hours. Gaslighting is also in full swing. She no longer trusts her own judgment and relies on his opinion. Physical abuse may have already begun, but in a mild form. Grabbing her arm too hard, pushing her in a way that could be dismissed as accidental. I remembered how Peregrine had squeezed Tallulah's wrist at dinner, and I was overcome with cold horror. Back in Providence, I couldn't settle down. Diana's words kept running through my head, especially her last words before we said goodbye. Be prepared for the fact that saving your daughter will take time, and that she may not thank you for it. 2 days after our trip to Boston, something unexpected happened. I went to a supermarket near my house and saw Tallulah in the fruit section. She had her back to me and was carefully selecting apples. She was wearing a light short-sleeved blouse, the first time in a long time I had seen her without long sleeves. I wanted to call out to her, but something stopped me. Instead, I quietly moved closer, pretending to look at the pears on the neighboring counter. When Tallulah turned to put the apples in her basket, I saw it. Dark bruises on her right forearm, 5 marks, as if someone had grabbed her arm and squeezed her fingers hard. Our eyes met, and I saw her eyes widen with surprise and fear. She quickly lowered her arm, trying to hide the bruises. "Dad," she said, her voice tense, "what are you doing here?" "The same as you," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Buying groceries." We stood there looking at each other, and it was as if a wall of unspoken words had grown between us. I wanted to ask about the bruises, wanted to grab her hand and take her away from here, away from the person who was hurting her. But Diana's words echoed in my head. "Don't pressure her. The more you insist, the more she will resist." "How are you?" I asked instead. "Fine," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "Just busy." "Tallulah," I took a deep breath. "I know our last meeting didn't go very well, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm always on your side. Always." She finally looked at me, and I saw a painful struggle in her eyes. For a moment, I thought she wanted to say something, to ask for help. But then she looked away again. "I have to go," she said. "Peregrine is waiting at home." "Tallulah," I gently touched her hand, not the one with the bruises. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you know where to find me." She nodded, still not looking me in the eye, and then quickly left, leaving the basket of apples on the counter. I watched her go, my heart breaking with pain and helpless rage. The bruises on her arm left no doubt that Peregrine had already resorted to physical abuse. Time was running out. After meeting Tallulah at the supermarket, I was restless for several days. The bruises on her arm were clear evidence that the situation was getting worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 5 dark marks on her pale skin. 5 finger marks. 5 pieces of evidence that the man living with my daughter was hurting her. I called her several times, but she didn't answer. I left messages on her answering machine. Short, cautious, without mentioning Peregrine or our meeting at the store. I just said that I loved her, and that she could always count on me. There was no response. On the 4th day after our meeting, Roland called me. "Orson," his voice sounded tense. "I have news." Not the best kind. I sat down, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "What happened?" "Remember I said I hired a private investigator to check out information about Buckminster's other families? Well, the detective kept following him, and yesterday he noticed something disturbing. Buckminster was looking at a country house in the Newport area, a small cottage in the woods, quite isolated. The owner is renting it out for a long term. Do you think he's going to move there with Tallulah?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Everything points to that," Roland confirmed. "The detective says Buckminster seemed very interested, asking a lot of questions about the neighbors, the distance to the nearest town, and the availability of internet and telephone service." I was overcome with a cold dread. Diana had warned about this, isolating the victim, taking complete control of her life. A country house in the woods, far from people, was the perfect place for that. "When?" I asked. "When is he planning to move?" "The detective says Buckminster asked about the possibility of coming by this weekend," Roland replied. "That's in 3 days, Orson. 3 days. Only 3 days to save my daughter from a man who would undoubtedly make her life hell as soon as he had complete control. We need to act, I said. Immediately. I agree, Roland replied. I think we need to meet and come up with a plan. Maybe at your place. In an hour? Yes, I agreed. And I'll call Jubilee. She can help. After talking to Roland, I immediately called Jubilee and briefly explained the situation. She agreed to come without hesitation. Exactly an hour later, they were both sitting in my living room. Jubilee brought a freshly baked blueberry pie to help our brains work better, as she said, but none of us was hungry. So, Roland began, laying out folders of documents on the coffee table. We have irrefutable evidence that Peregrine Haywood is actually Fletcher Buckminster, who served time for domestic violence. We have testimony from his ex-wife. We have evidence that he has other families in other states, and we know that he plans to take Tallulah to an isolated location this coming weekend. The problem is, I added, Tallulah doesn't believe a word against him. He's convinced her that I'm trying to destroy their marriage. That's exactly how these manipulators operate, Jubilee said, shaking her head. They create a wall of distrust around their victim, distrust of everyone except themselves. We need to break down that wall, Roland said. Show Tallulah the truth in a way she can't ignore. But how? I asked. She refuses to talk to me, doesn't answer my calls. We need to create a situation where Buckminster reveals his true nature, Roland said after a pause. A moment when the mask slips so obviously that even Tallulah can't deny it. Provoke him? I wasn't sure about that idea. It could be dangerous for Tallulah. We don't have to provoke him into violence, Roland said. It's enough to make him admit his true identity, his other names, his other families. I have an idea, Jubilee said suddenly. What if we arrange a meeting attended by all interested parties? Tallulah, of course, perhaps one of Buckminster's other women or his ex-wife, and him. How are we going to arrange that? I asked. Tallulah won't come at my invitation, especially if she finds out there will be other people there. What if it's not an invitation, but a coincidence? Jubilee suggested. What if we arrange for Tallulah and Peregrine to be in a place where they accidentally meet, say, Lorraine from Vermont, who considers herself Edmund Prescott's wife? Roland shook his head thoughtfully. That's difficult to arrange. How do we convince Lorraine to come to Providence without explaining why? And how do we guarantee that Tallulah and Peregrine will be in the right place at the right time? We all fell silent, deep in thought. The problem seemed unsolvable. How could we expose someone who guarded his secrets so carefully? What if we approach it from a different angle? I finally said. What if, instead of arranging a face-to-face meeting, we provide Tallulah with irrefutable evidence? Something she can't ignore or dismiss as my imagination? What kind of evidence do you have in mind? Roland asked. A video, I replied. A video in which Peregrine admits that he is Fletcher Buckminster. A video in which he talks about his other wives, about his prison sentence. Something that cannot be faked or misinterpreted. But how do we get him to make such a confession on camera? Jubilee asked. I thought about it. Indeed, how? Peregrine was too cautious, too cunning to fall for a conventional bait. What if I offer him a deal? Roland said after a long pause. I'll tell him I know about his past, about his other families, but I'm willing to keep quiet for a certain amount of money. Blackmail? I was shocked. Roland, you're a lawyer. Not real blackmail, he explained. We're not going to take his money. It will just be a way to get him to confess, thinking he's talking privately to someone who is willing to keep his secrets for a fee. How are we going to record it? Jubilee asked. My detective has the necessary equipment, Roland said. Hidden cameras, microphones. We could arrange a meeting in a neutral place, like a hotel. I wasn't sure. The plan seemed risky, borderline illegal. But what else could we do? Tallulah wasn't listening to me. The police couldn't intervene without evidence of actual violence, and time was running out. Okay, I said finally. Let's try it. But what then? How will we show the recording to Tallulah? I can invite her over for tea, Jubilee suggested. She's always been nice to me. I'll say I'm worried about her, that I haven't seen her in a long time. She might agree, especially if Peregrine is busy at that time. How can we guarantee that he'll be busy? I asked. A meeting with me, Roland said. I'll schedule it for the same time that Jubilee invites Tallulah for tea. We continued to discuss the details of the plan. Roland would contact Peregrine tomorrow, hint that he knew his secrets, and suggest a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial solution. The meeting would take place the day after tomorrow at a small hotel in downtown Providence. At the same time, Jubilee would call Tallulah and invite her for tea. What if she refuses? Jubilee asked. Or what if Peregrine won't let her go alone? Then we'll have to improvise, I said. Maybe I can intercept her somewhere and show her the recording on my phone. The main thing is to do it before the weekend, before he takes her to that country house. We discussed the details at length, thinking through every step, every possible reaction from Peregrine and Tallulah. By the time Roland and Jubilee finally left, it was already dark. I was left alone, sitting in an armchair in the living room with a cup of cold tea in my hands. The plan seemed complicated, risky, with many variables that we couldn't control. But it was our only chance to save Tallulah from a man who would undoubtedly make her life unbearable as soon as he gained complete control. The next day passed in tense anticipation. Roland called after lunch and reported that he had spoken with Peregrine, who had agreed to meet. He was very calm, very cool, Roland said, even when I hinted that I knew about his past. He said he didn't understand what I was talking about, but he was willing to meet to clear up the misunderstanding. He doesn't suspect a trick? I asked. I don't think so, Roland replied. I was very careful. I spoke vaguely. He probably thinks I'm just trying to protect you from accusations of slander or something like that. Jubilee also called with good news. Tallulah had agreed to come over for tea tomorrow. She sounded uncertain, Jubilee said. She said she had to ask Peregrine, but then she called back and confirmed. It seems he'll be busy at that time. At a meeting with Roland, I said, feeling the plan begin to take shape. On the day of the operation, I was too excited to sit at home. Roland forbade me from coming to the hotel. Peregrine might see me and suspect a trap. Instead, I went to Jubilee's to help her prepare for Tallulah's visit. Jubilee's house was cozy and bright, with lots of plants on the windowsills and photographs on the walls. She baked a blueberry pie, the one Tallulah loved as a child, and brewed a special tea with herbs from her garden. I don't think she'll eat much, Jubilee said as she set the cups on the table. But home cooking might help her feel safe, remind her of better times. I was helping her with the final preparations when my phone rang. It was Roland. Everything's ready, he said. The detective has installed the equipment in the hotel room. 2 hidden cameras, microphones. Everything is recorded on a secure server. So even if Buckminster suspects something and finds one of the cameras, we'll still have the recording. Good, I said. When's the meeting? In an hour, Roland replied. I'm already there, checking the final details. I looked at my watch. Tallulah was supposed to arrive at Jubilee's at about the same time. Everything was going according to plan. Good luck, I said. Be careful with him, Roland. This man is dangerous. Don't worry, Roland assured me. There's a detective and another security guard in the next room. If anything goes wrong, they'll intervene. We ended the conversation, and I went back to helping Jubilee. Time dragged agonizingly slowly. Every few minutes, I glanced at my watch, thinking about what was happening at the hotel, wondering if Roland would be able to get Peregrine to confess. Finally, the doorbell rang. Jubilee went to answer it, and I retreated to the kitchen as we had agreed. Tallulah wasn't supposed to know I was here, at least not until we showed her the recording. I could hear their voices from the hallway. Greetings, pleasantries. Tallulah's voice sounded tense, unnatural. Then they went into the living room, and I could no longer make out the words, only the general tone of the conversation. Jubilee spoke calmly, friendly. Tallulah replied briefly, reservedly. About half an hour passed when my phone vibrated with an incoming message. Roland. Done. Everything is recorded. He confessed to everything. I'm on my way to you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The first part of the plan had worked. We had Peregrine's confession on video. Now we had to show it to Tallulah and convince her to accept the truth. 20 minutes later, I heard another knock at the door. It had to be Roland with the recording. I tensed up, preparing for the most difficult part of our plan. Tallulah's surprised voice came from the living room. Mr. Pitcairn? What are you doing here? Then Jubilee's voice, calm and confident. Tallulah, we didn't invite you here just for tea today. We need to show you something. Something very important about Peregrine. About Peregrine? Tallulah's voice sounded irritated. Again? I thought we'd already discussed this. I don't want to hear any accusations against my husband. These aren't accusations, Roland said. These are his own words. Recorded less than an hour ago. There was a pause, and I imagined Tallulah looking at the tablet or laptop that Roland must have taken out. I slowly left the kitchen and stopped in the living room doorway. Tallulah was sitting on the sofa, Jubilee next to her. Roland was standing in front of them, holding the tablet. The screen showed a hotel room and two figures, Roland and Peregrine, sitting across from each other at a table. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see Tallulah's face change as she watched the recording. First disbelief, then shock, then something like denial, and finally understanding, a terrible, all-consuming understanding that the man she had married was not who he claimed to be. When the recording ended, the room fell silent. Tallulah sat motionless, staring at the blank tablet screen. Her face was white as chalk. This can't be true, she finally said, but there was no confidence in her voice. He couldn't. It's true, Tallulah, Roland said softly. Everything you just saw and heard is true. Peregrine Haywood is actually Fletcher Buckminster. He has a criminal record for domestic violence. He has other families in other states. And he was planning to take you to an isolated house in the woods this weekend. I took a step forward, and Tallulah looked up. There was such pain and confusion in her eyes that my heart ached. Daddy, her voice sounded like a little girl's, lost and frightened. Have you been here all along? Yes, I replied, moving closer. We all wanted to help you, Tallulah. To protect you, she looked at me, at Jubilee, at Roland. There were tears in her eyes. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know.